All right, so if you talk to any old-school D&D player about the classics, they're always going to bring up the Against the Giants series. It's a legend, an absolute cornerstone of the game. But, the first and third parts, they tend to get all the glory. That middle chapter, G2, it's often just seen as, well, the bridge between them. But here's the thing. I'm here to argue that this bridge, it's actually the most important piece of the whole puzzle. What if I told you that one little 8-page booklet from 1978 completely changed the trajectory of role-playing games? Because that's the story we're diving into today. This module, Glacial Rift of the Frost Giant Jarl, was this incredibly potent thing packed into a tiny package. And its impact, its DNA, is still all over the campaigns we're playing right now. Okay, so the first thing G2 did that was just mind-blowing for the time was this. Before this module, dungeons were basically a series of rooms with monsters in them. Monster in a box. But G2 made the world itself the villain. The Glacial Rift wasn't just a backdrop. It was an active, hostile force that was trying to kill you with every single step. And get this, Gary Gygax pulled all of this off in just 8 pages. That's it, 8. To put that in perspective, a single chapter in one of today's adventure books can easily be 40, 50 pages long. That kind of brutal efficiency is the key to understanding the module's genius. Because crammed into those 8 little pages were 51 distinct encounter areas, and a staggering 35 of them had hostile monsters. You couldn't just kick down the door and fight your way through. No way. It forced you to be smart, to be tactical. It was more like infiltration and guerrilla warfare than a simple dungeon crawl. And this is where it gets really clever. Gygax weaponized the environment using pure math. This wasn't just flavor text, ooh, it's slippery. No. This was cold, hard probability. Just walking around was a life-or-death puzzle. You're on an icy ledge? That's a 1 in 6 chance you slip and fall 150 feet. Boom. Character's probably dead. Wandering through a misty cave, the odds get worse and you might drop your sword. And if you do, well, there's a 1 in 4 chance it's just gone. Forever. It's not a dungeon, it's a nightmare of dice rolls. But maybe the most controversial thing Gygax did was aim a new rule squarely at the party's heaviest hitter, the magic user. He basically introduced a mechanic that directly punished wizards for using their most powerful spells. It was a direct, in-game nerf to arcane magic. So, imagine you're a wizard. Your go-to move is Fireball, right? Or maybe a Lightning Bolt. Well, in G2, you had to think real hard before you did that. Because if you let one rip, the whole glacier starts melting. Now you've got pools of freezing water everywhere, the cavern fills with blinding steam, and here's the real kicker. You might literally melt the treasure you came for. It's brilliant. It forces you to be so much more creative than just blowing everything up. Now, you gotta remember, all this innovation wasn't happening in a vacuum. To really get why G2 was such a big deal, you have to picture the world in 1978. Back then, TSR, the company that made D&D, they didn't really sell adventures. The whole idea was that dungeon masters made their own stuff, right? The very concept of buying a pre-written module was totally new, totally unproven. And then Against the Giants comes along and just shatters that old way of thinking. Gygax links G1 to G2 to G3. And in doing so, he basically invents the first epic, serialized story in RPG history. G2 is that critical middle piece, the one that pioneered what we now call the adventure path, the model that pretty much every big campaign uses today. And it didn't stop there. This was the launchpad for the D series and the legendary Queen of the Demon Web pits. But G2 was more than just a good adventure. It was a perfect example of a design philosophy people now call Gygaxian Naturalism. And the idea is pretty simple, really. A dungeon shouldn't be a random funhouse of monsters and traps. It needed to feel like a real place, a place that could actually exist. And that's really the heart of it right there. Thinking of the dungeon as an ecosystem. Gygax wasn't just a game designer. He approached these worlds like a naturalist studying a real environment. And that's what made them feel so believable, even with, yetis and giants running around. So what does that actually look like in the game? Well, it means the Rift had a food chain. You had your yetis, your winter wolves, it all made sense. And the giants themselves, they weren't just big bags of hit points. They were a society. There were giantesses, young giants, they had an economy based on raiding. They were even doing diplomacy with emissaries from other giant clans. It just made the whole place feel so alive.
All right, here's a fun little story for you. When this thing was officially published, they included the pre-gen characters from the original tournament. Well, the TSR staff who got stuck with making them were apparently not thrilled with the job. So what did they do? They gave them the most ridiculous names you can imagine. We're talking about Gleep Werp Eyebiter, Thafel Dweomer Croft. It's this hilarious bit of passive-aggressive revenge that somehow became legendary.
Okay, but here's where it gets really good. Forget the giants for a second, forget the killer environment. G2 was hiding a massive secret. See, on the surface, your mission is pretty straightforward. Go beat up some giants, find out what they're up to. But that wasn't the real story. The real story was buried deep, deep in the ice. Because as you got deeper into the rift, you'd start finding these weird clues, things that just didn't fit. Tunnels that collapsed from below, bizarre artifacts made of black stone, and the creepiest part? Instructions written on tanned human skin. You just knew right then that something was very, very wrong. And then comes the twist. The giants? They weren't in charge. They were just puppets. The real villain, introduced here for the very first time in D&D history, was a race of dark elves called the Drow. All those strange clues were this brilliant breadcrumb trail leading to a massive conspiracy run by these dark elves who worship some kind of crazy elemental god. And this kind of masterful storytelling was baked into the environment itself. I mean, you could find the frozen bodies of other adventurers stuck in the ice, and the loot on them told its own story. You find an elf with a staff of frost, or, and this is just beautifully tragic, a human with a ring of fire resistance. It's this grim little reminder of everyone who tried and failed before you even got there. Ultimately, that's what makes G2 so historically important. That Drow reveal. It took what could have been just another dungeon crawl and turned it into the narrative linchpin, connecting a simple go kill giants quest to some of the biggest, most epic stories in all of D&D. It completely changed what an adventure could even be. And because of when it was written, the module itself is like a fossil. It was caught right between the old original D&D rules and the new, more complex advanced D&D. So you find these weird little artifacts in the text, like a magic sword that has an alignment but no intelligence, which totally breaks the rules that would come out just a year later. It's literally a snapshot of the game as it was evolving. Even the physical book is an artifact. I mean, you've got that amazing cover art by the one and only Dave Trampier. The cover actually detached so you could use it as a DM screen. How cool is that for an innovation? And of course, who could forget the infamous blue maps? The ones that were basically impossible to read in a dimly lit basement back in the 70s? A true product of its time. So, all of this leaves us with a really interesting question, right? Was this incredibly punishing design a work of genius? Something that forced players to get smarter, more creative? Or was it just an unfair relic from that old DM versus the players mindset? Was it a masterclass in game design? Or was it just a meat grinder? It's a debate that really gets to the heart of what we want our games to be.